You're listening to Halftime with your host, Mylan Bittenbender, where each week we take a few minutes to step off the field of life and discuss the challenges and joys of navigating life in the middle years. I hope your time with us today will help you develop your strategy for a winning second half. Welcome to the locker room. You're among friends. Today, my guest on Halftime is Joe Horness. Joe has known success at great levels. He was part of the largest church in the country at one point, leading their worship, very involved in drama and all kinds of exciting productions at a church called Willow Creek Community Church. Many of you have probably heard of that before. But today, Joe talks about what it means to look back on all of that success through the lens of a transition, a midlife transition, and realize the power of pursuing a new angle, the angle of significance. And he doesn't despise all of the success and all of the wonderful days that they had in the ministry at Willow Creek Community Church. But he says that there's a new kind of joy and a new kind of excitement and a new kind of passion in his pursuit of significance and the way that he lives life a little bit differently now after midlife. And Joe is a super easygoing guy and just a wonderful man to talk to. And so I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation that I had with Joe. Like I said, brand new friend. I didn't know him 2 weeks ago, but we've sat down and had a couple of really great conversations, including the one that we've recorded in this episode of the Halftime Podcast. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Joe Horness. Hey, Joe, thank you so much for meeting me in Halftime. Thanks so much for being on the show today and for being willing to share some of your time with us.
Great, man. It's great to be here. Great to be with you. And thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm excited to have this conversation. We've talked a couple of times, and today we're going to get into a lot of your own personal midlife journey and your midlife experience and the things that you've learned through that process and how life is different than it was before. But I'd love to start with just a little bit of a little backstory, a little bit of who you are, what makes Joe Horness who he is, and what has brought you to this place. So can you start with a little bit of your childhood, maybe a little bit about where you grew up, what kind of family, what kind of setting, and maybe what your childhood years were a little bit like?
Yeah, real briefly, I grew up in West Michigan, right along the shores of Lake Michigan. Grew up on the water, fishing, sailing, on doing anything on boats or on the water. 3 younger sisters. My mom and dad, we attended the evangelical free church that my grandfather from Norway had started. And we're there every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. One of those kind of backgrounds, very much in ministry. But interestingly for me, as you learn the rest of my story, it was also a church that where drums were of the devil, violins were of the devil. They told me at one point, young man, we don't play those chords in this church. And I was
Wow.
like, which chords? And so it always was a shock to me that I ended up being a church musician. I was going to seminary in Chicago and heard about a church that was supposed to be for unchurched people, and went out to a little movie theater where essentially it was a few hundred high school kids, some that dragged their parents along. And for the first time, I was in a church that had drums and guitars and a drama and a multimedia. And it was just starting up in this little theater called Willow Creek Theater. And before long, ended up volunteering there and serving, and then ended up on staff and basically spent the next 30 or so years of my life around that place. But
Wow.
but that was kind of my background growing up, was in that sort of a situation. Great family, though. I mean, a family that modeled what it meant to love each other and to love God. So, yeah, that was kind of my journey growing up.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been really refreshing then for you to, because obviously you're a music person, and from our conversations and from what I know of your history, I mean, music is just written into your soul, and that must have been, quite an experience being able to see that and allowed to be a part of it. Now, you say you grew up in West Michigan. When would your teenage years have been? Because I don't even know how old you are. We haven't even talked about that.
Yeah, no, the mid '70s were,
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 1974. I can't believe it's been all those years ago. And then went to school at Trinity College in Chicago and went on. My dad was on the board of Trinity Seminary, so I went on to Trinity Seminary but I was always thinking, I feel called into ministry, and I
Mm,
want to serve God with my life, but never quite was sure there was a place in the church for me growing up in the kind of background that I did. And really, I kind of was like the most miserable seminary student, feeling like I was being obedient to God to do what he was calling me to do, but I couldn't understand why or what in the world he wanted to do with my life. Being a young artist, but feeling like there was no place for me. And
yeah.
so walking into a place like Willow Creek for the first time and seeing somebody that said it was okay to play guitars and drums and things in church, and for the first time going, what, maybe there's a place for me here,
Yeah.
and
That's awesome.
so yeah, it was refreshing, it was eye-opening, it was life-changing for me.
Yeah, yeah. Just for a little bit of a rabbit trail, and I
Hmm.
hadn't planned on going here, but we talk about calling a lot of times, and I think some people may be a little bit confused about what that means. I know I have my own perspective on what that means. I'd love to hear from you what that meant, what that felt like, that you felt there was a calling to ministry on your life.
Yeah, I tried to live every day, with some of those verses that we all grew up in, at least you and I, those of us in church backgrounds grew up in, with, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, and he will direct your paths,
Mm,
and delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Verses like that just basically said, if you surrender your life day by day to God, there will be a lot of left and right misturns and a lot of ups and downs, but overall, God will direct your paths, give you wisdom,
mm,
and not that there's only one right choice, even as I've learned through, but that God says, if you surrender your heart to me, I'll use you. And I just wanted always to be in that place where you say, if there's a God and he's real and he lives in my life, uh, then I want to give him my all. And I want him to be
yeah.
in charge of where this all goes. And so, as best I could, just day to day, I tried to go, Lord, where do you want to go? And when it came to ending college, I had always really felt like my dad offered me a job going into business with him, and and I came back to him and said, Dad, um, I think I really feel called, like God wants to use my life somehow to build His
Yeah.
church and to serve Him. And fortunately, my dad said, I think that's a good choice. So
Hmm.
so I was grateful for that. But so that was just always the desire in my life, and still is, really, to
Yeah.
just say, um, I want you to have everything. I mean, and I really want to follow you, not in some of the ways that today's church tends to define Christianity,
Mm,
but in ways that say, but if God is a God of love and service and grace and wants to be involved in our lives, that I want to be a part of.
hmm. So you got your dad's blessing
Yeah.
to be in ministry. Did you get your dad's blessing to be in ministry, where there's drums and drama and all that?
Um, yes, he was supportive, and he told me in college if I majored in music, he wouldn't pay for it. But if, uh,
Wow.
but so I majored in philosophy instead. How's that? like there's much more of a living in that. But at the
Right.
time I said, well, I could, it would either set me up for law school or seminary, and he could see the sense of that. So, but yeah, it took him a while to, at first
Mm,
they were worried that I was, off on some cult or something,
yeah.
going to a place that had drums and all that. But over time, they really came to fall in love with the heart of it and the spirit behind it and what we were trying to do. And
Yeah.
the quickest you can decide whether this is keepable, but uh, my dad, we used to do these major outreach shows at Willow when we first started off, and thousands of people would come. They were
Mm,
involved drama and music and everything together. And so my dad brought my Norwegian grandfather. And beforehand, he came into my office. My dad did and said, he said, "Hey, I brought Bestefar," which is Norwegian for grandfather. And he said, he's here. And I was like, Dad, he's going to hate this, you know? And he said, we don't play cards. We don't dance. We don't smoke. We don't chew, and rock music was like, Dad, what were you thinking? He said, we'll see how he does. But so the saving grace was that my grandfather was the wisest person probably I ever met.
mm.
So after this show with fog machines and explosions and rock music and all this back in the early 80s, um, he was in my office and I came downstairs and I said, "Hey, Bestafar," I said, "What'd you think?" And he said, "Joey," he said, "if I would have seen or heard that music on the radio in my car," he said, "I would have changed the station." I said, "Yeah, I kind of figured." And then he said, "Let me tell you a little story." And just
Mm.
to keep it brief, he told me he said, when I was your age, he said, the big debate in our church was whether we were going to continue to have Norwegian services or whether we were going to switch to English. And he said, and I finally stood up in one of those hot meetings and said, for me and my sons, he said, I'm going to have to take my boys to a church where they can hear the gospel in a language they understand.
Wow.
And then he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, seems to me that's what you're doing here. You keep up the good work. And, and that was a turning point for me, just to have him go, no, that's what you are trying to put the gospel in a language that people understand. That's what you ought to be doing. And that was very much where I felt God's calling was on my life for, in those years.
Sounds like he was a very wise man.
Yeah.
Wise and discerning, able to, put his own emotions or his own thoughts or biases to rest
Hmm.
and look at the bigger picture.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, for some of our listeners, Willow Creek might not mean much of anything, but for those of us who grew up in the church, and especially those of us who've been in ministry, Willow Creek really set the standard, was the standard bearer in a lot of circles, most circles, for ministry in the 80s and 90s. And you were able to be a part of that. Tell us a little bit about your early adult years then. You mentioned that out of college, you decided to kind of enter into, you started out, I think it's great that you started out as an attender. I didn't know that part. That's awesome. But then you ended up on staff there. Tell us a little bit about what that was like in those years.
Yeah. As I said, and the early years were, it was, nobody had done this before that we were aware of. I mean, so we had
Right.
a group of drama folks, actors that would literally walk into the pastor's office ahead of the service and say, what are you teaching about today? And he would tell them and they would run in the other room and make up a skit about it. And that evolved into down the road into these amazing, incredible, full blown dramas that they would do. And we had a couple lighting poles with lights, bare wires that would spark and smoke. And you kind of go, I'm not sure this is safe in a theater, you know? And we had a wonderful guy that played trumpet And but he played in bars all night on Saturday nights. He was one of these one man deals that would play drums and sing and play the trumpet all by himself at a drum set, and and so he was forever falling asleep on stage, and and so we were struggling along to try to do something different. But
Mm.
what we tried early on to do, though, was just every week to sit down and say, what did we learn? How could we be better? You know,
Yeah.
what would we change? How, so we would go at some point. Somebody said maybe we should make sure that the lighting trees aren't going to catch fire in the theater, you know, and we should fix those. And little by little, we just kept growing at what we were doing, and but over time, trying to just take the love of God and put it in a language that people understood. The church began to grow, and we went, at 20 years later, we were on 23,000 people on weekends, and
Yeah.
so it obviously had an impact, and we can debate these days whether all that was healthy or not healthy, but it was touching people's lives, and I served under amazing leaders who had this deep passion for community, that we would do this with people we love, and that we would do this in a way where we fell more and more in love with Christ, that it wasn't just about putting on a show, that it was about who we were becoming with each other and in ourselves and in our walk with God. And so I thank God for the opportunity to be a part of the most amazing community of musicians and artists and believers that I had ever seen and ever have seen. It was
Yeah.
a real gift to be a part of that.
I every story has its ups and downs, and we know that Willow has had its own difficulties. Not every chapter of Willow's story was splendid, but I've talked to lots of people over the years. Oftentimes, people that would come to under my leadership at the different churches that I worked at, and sometimes they'd talk about their previous experiences. And I can remember in particular there was a couple of kids who came from a Catholic background and heard for the first time under my ministry about a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And I mean, just radically changed them. But brother and sister, both of them got saved and baptized. And then they began to speak disparagingly about their Catholic upbringing. And I said, whoa, 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 don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
God's used all of that. Um, to bring you to where you are and to reach other people. And I think too many times we think that the story of our own salvation or our own faith story has to be, all roses and bright lights and beautiful all along the way. And yet we see that the journey of life, whether it be our own personal life or our church life or our work life or our family marriage life, all of those things, there's challenges, there's difficulties, and we got to take the mountaintops with the valleys. And I love that you're able to look back on that with fond memories and think of all the wonderful things that God did in and through you and the people that were
Yeah.
with. So you your early adult years, most of your early adult years were there with Willow, but this podcast is about midlife.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from our previous conversations that, like many, midlife was a time of transition for you. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, when I say midlife, what does that mean to you? How does that resonate with you? And what comes to mind?
Um, there is a book, and I can't think of the author's name right off the top of my head, but called Strength to Strength. And in that, he talks about that in our earlier years, we have what he calls fluid strength. And it's where we have the ability to put in immense hours and creativity and energy into building something that, like we did at Willow. You take a church from
Mm.
a few hundred kids to 20 some thousand people. I mean, that took a lot of fluid energy and a lot of
Right,
time and,
right.
and committing everything to that. And then he talks about that you just actually in your 50s or so, you actually hit a change in your brain and your physiology, and where you don't have that kind of energy and creativity and something. And he talks about the importance of beginning to change over to this crystallized energy, where it really becomes a time of saying, I think of the psalm that says, one generation will teach his mighty acts to the next. It becomes a time of
Mm.
training and developing and investing what we've learned in that spirit, in that time, to the next generation. But it is a time of shifting, and you're thinking of changing your energy, of kind of changing the investment that you make in the world and into others. And I think for me in particular, it has been a really significant time of when you have spent your life up to that point, in the kind of environments that I was in, with the numbers of people, and then we did conferences
Mm.
all over the world. So I think I've been on every continent in the world, teaching and producing conferences, and all of those kind of things. And I don't say that with ego in mind. I say that humbly and gratefully to God, but to go from that kind of experience to downshifting to a place where you go, okay, how do I come to terms with, the fact now that I sit at my desk and I write and I create and I do podcasts for churches with worship ministries that want to figure out how to bring God a richer offering. But most days it's
Mm.
me and sitting here. And then in recent years, I had some health challenges where turned out I've had epilepsy all my life, but they were I would only have little tiny zap seizures until I hit midlife, and they started becoming more severe. So
Wow.
in the last year and a half, a year of that time, I haven't been able to drive, because if you have a seizure, you can't drive for 6 months. So, so now I'm not only a long way from all of that, but now I'm sitting at my desk with my computer and my journal and my Bible or whatever else I'm doing, and but I can't even go anywhere. And
Mm.
so you spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what does this season of life mean, and what does that look like as we move forward into the next season of life? And ultimately, is God any less present here? Does God expect my fruitfulness to go down, and he's just okay with that?
Hmm.
Do I just stop trying? Or is this God's design that somehow, whether we really understand God and know God or not, whether, some of us out here listening are just going, well, that's all new to me. But you go, you know what? But there are seasons where you go, maybe this is an opportunity
Hmm.
to hear God on a different level, to walk with him on a different level, to know him on a different level, and and to try to approach even things like seizures, to go, okay, God, you just have slowed me down majorly, and you have quieted my heart and put me in spaces where now I have to ask, what do you want to do with this? How do you want to speak? What do you want to teach me? Um, this this can either be a huge disaster in my life, or I can look at it and go, there's an opportunity here, and maybe God is up to something, because I believe that he is a loving God who never gives up on me, and maybe he has purpose even in this. And
Hmm.
and I think that's the season that I'm in now.
I I think it's interesting that when life circumstances changed and difficulties have come along, instead of thinking that God changed,
Hmm.
you seem to perceive it as if well, your life has changed, but God has never changed, and you are presenting this as if there's a humility that wants to understand. Because what I see a lot of times is when circumstances change, people feel like God used to love me and now He doesn't.
Mm.
God, what's going on? Why did you change? But you seem to deal with that in a little bit different way. Was it part of your experience, or do you think it was what was written on your heart in faith when you were young? Or what do you think created that stability in you to be able to say, okay, life has changed, but God hasn't? Lord, help me to adjust my perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a great question, and it's a really deep question. And as much as I shared about kind of my background earlier, but the reality was in my home too, was that you know, we got affirmation for being first string, first chair, straight A's, for
Mm,
performing. And I did that in Willow Creek. Willow Creek was a phenomenal place to do that. Perform. If you were going after success, I mean, we were kind of the world's vision of church success. And I was really good at running that race. And I think, but there comes this point that we've talked about, that where you go, all right, but somewhere in there you have to move from the running and the racing and the success, climbing the ladder of success, to going, uh, what's the ladder of significance look like?
mm,
What happens when God, and I think if you walk with God day by day, and you just say, Lord, here I am, and you listen. One, I think God was faithful. I always ask God to just show me who He is. And I think over time, He's been faithful to go, this is the heart of who I am. And so if something doesn't fit in me with the heart of who I know Him to be, then I have to change. And I think, well, I know God doesn't walk away. I know God doesn't give up. I know He hasn't decided that He doesn't need me anymore because I'm such and such an age. I know that His heart is faithful, and He wants me to know more of His love and more of His grace and more of His character. He wants me to become more like Him. And this shift of success to significance, this shift of being able to do what I did in my 20s and 30s and 40s and early 50s to where I am now is part of His design. And it's God giving me an opportunity to say, now, what if this season is about going deeper? What if this
mm,
season is about becoming richer? What if this season is about understanding my grace more, my love more, my goodness more? What if it is about slowing down enough to really look in your wife's eyes and say, I've been running really fast. I'm slowing down and I'm looking you in the eyes and I'm saying, you know what? I adore you. I love you. You are the most amazing person. I'm sorry I haven't said it more.
mm,
Same thing with my kids or now my grandkids. When if back then I would go, God, what's your calling on my life? What do you want me? And so I'd be flying off to Africa or Europe or wherever. And now I get up in the mornings and I go, God, what do you have for my life
mm,
today? And often right now my daughter and her little 3-year-old boy are living, and her family are living with us. And I get up in the morning and go, my calling is today. It's not 25,000 people. It's not conference. My calling today is to get up and love that one little 3-year-old and play computer games with him or go swim in the pool or just hang out. But for him to know that he has a grandfather that adores him. And,
mm,
so I'm learning to see this season as an opportunity. Um, my dad chased the wheels of success very, very successfully. But when those wheels started to slow down, I think Dad had a really hard time adjusting to that. And that, so suddenly the significance and the income and the recognition and those things weren't there.
Yeah.
And I watched my dad grow. Bitter would be the wrong, but more distant and colder. And it was like the things in my dad's life that he hadn't really allowed the Spirit of God to touch became more. I think as we get older, we either allow God to soften those things and heal those things and take those things deeper, or that we become more brittle and we become, and they become more painful. And I watched that process in my dad, and it made me really feel like when I hit that season, if you don't deal with those things along the way, they become more brittle. And I just resolved in my spirit of going, whatever comes, whether it's seizures or health issues or whatever, I want to grow more tender. I want
Yeah.
my spirit to be slower. I want to know God's love more. I want his grace to be bigger. And these days how it would go, his love is so much more massive than I ever understood in all my years of ministry. His grace is so much greater than I had any comprehension. And I just want to continue on that journey, but a lot of it is this passage of time right now of going through all of that stuff of ministry and activity to this season of kind of a forced slowdown and a
Yeah.
changing of seasons that I can start to look at and say, maybe this is what God has. Maybe this is an opportunity, not just a disappointment. And
Yeah. A lot of us look at other people like you and listen to you. I mean, as you're talking, I think, wow, for you to be able to feel that kind of peace with who you are and where life is at. And, we'll talk about the ego struggle in a few
mm,
minutes, this ego struggle that says, I don't have to be in front of 20,000 people anymore. I can be in front of my 3-year-old and be performing love and care for him and be just as satisfied, and stuff like that. I think it's easy for us to look and say, oh, wow, man, I wish that would have happened for me. But when we talked the other day, you talked about midlife kind of being like, your apple cart got tossed,
mm.
and we've got this image of the cart upside down and apples all over the place, and life kind of going through this stage or this time of chaos and disruption. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think, for a lot of people that are joining this podcast, they're kind of like, okay, my life is a wreck right now.
Mm.
I love what this guy's talking about. Yeah, I want to get to that place, but right now my life's a wreck. Could you help us maybe connect with that journey in your life a little bit more? And maybe, I don't know if you want to get into the circumstances of what, your upset apple cart looked like and things like that, but just kind of share a little bit of that stage.
Well, I think for me, I've been fortunate to not hit too many major catastrophes in my life. Seizures is a minor thing, and some of that. But through ministry stuff, I watched 4 different pastors crash and burn.
Mm,
And churches get upended, and things that you spent your life pouring into all of a sudden get upended and go,
mm,
what did I just do with the last 30 years? Was that still? And fortunately, I could look back and go, it always comes back to people, and you go, no. But when you're loving people and serving people and sharing the love of Christ with people, you go, and in the way that I think he intended, you go, no, there's always value in that, and no one can ever take that away. Um,
yeah.
but but you have to begin to rethink, what does well done really look like? And
Mhm.
here, here's a thought I've been playing with, but I think I spent my first 40 years in ministry, whatever it was, the phrase that we would all toss around, in with great reverence, was Paul saying, I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to hear, well done. I want to hear, well done. Which was, in my mind, was, I would think of Paul's shipwrecks and being jailed and being tortured and persecuted and going, if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing well enough, you know? And, and thinking that's what I want to hear when I get to heaven. And, as I've gone through kind of this shift in seasons in my life, I've gone, is that I grew up, that was the kind of love my dad gave me.
Mm.
Perform, do it right, get it really good, be right, and well done. I love you now. And I go, but I don't think that's the heart of God. I don't think God's going, I only love you if you do if you do it right, and if you perform it right, and if you have the church that's bigger than the church down the street, or if you have the worship team that's doing the latest Bethel, cover band stuff. You got just you go, what if the first thing I want to hear when I walk into heaven is I know you. I adore you. I love you. And Christ comes and says, I love our relationship. I love who we've been to each other. And then there's a pat on the back and says, oh, by the way, well done. But then take it further. And then I started thinking about, well, what if the well done is really about the second part? What if he's saying well done to is, I love the relationship we have. I love the way we've walked to each other. I love the way you've grown in love and grace and patience and acceptance for the people that I created and that I love. And when Paul says, I want to hear well done, what he's really talking about, I want to hear about the relationship I had with God, about he's the one that said his grace is sufficient, his strength is perfected in my weakness. He is more than enough. The cross was enough. Our sin is forgiven. We don't have to live in fear of death. We don't have to live with guilt. And this is Paul. And what if when he says, I want to hear well done, it's about that stuff. It's not about the size of the ministry and the tortures and all the stuff that we want to do. It is about the depth of the relationship that we have. And more, I just find myself in a place going, I want to walk with God in a way that in this season, he's slowed me down. He's taken me off the treadmill, and that I walk with him and hear him and begin to understand his love and his grace on a level that I've never known before. That the well done is about the relationship, not just about the stuff that we do. And then, then I want to serve. Then I want to love my grandson. I want to love my kids. I want to love my wife. And what's interesting then to me too is, and humbling, when my wife and my kids come to me now and say, Dad, we see a difference. We see something in you, and you're different. And when I think about the people like you and I talked about, Dan Webster connected us. I look at something like Dan and you go, what was it about Dan that we love? And you go, every now and then you meet someone in your life that you go, I want to know God the way they do.
Hmm.
I want to
Yeah.
love Christ the way they do. I want to exhibit his love and his grace and his kindness and his goodness the way that that person does. I want to, and you go, yep, Dan's one of those guys. There are people in my life that are those people. And honestly, I go, I would, I'd like to walk with God in a way that I'm one of those people for my wife and for my kids and for those I serve. You know, not just for the songs I sang or what I can play or the worship I led or, you know, the consulting I do, you know, but to go, you know, I would really like, we started that story about like my dad, but I'd really like to grow more tender
Hmm.
and more whole in those things in my life where where I need healing still, and where I just, you know, where I still need God to grow me up. I'd like for this season, to be about that.
Yeah, you mentioned Dan, and I sense if we would have met under different circumstances. Now, I did get an idea of some of your accomplishments before we actually met. With Dan, it was the other way around. I didn't know
Mhm.
anything about Dan's background, but yeah, I saw this man of God, and I was drawn to his character and the kind of person
Mhm.
that he was as a soul. Um, and even now, knowing about his pretty stellar accomplishments in life by human standards, the idea of who he is as a person is still way more important than any of that stuff. And I think sometimes we go into midlife and we sense that we're kind of losing our edge or our ability to function and succeed at the same kind of levels. You know, I talked in a previous episode about the fact that, you know, part of what brings on this kind of midlife season or crisis is this idea that my strength is waning. Maybe I'm even losing my mental edge a little
Mhm.
bit. And I didn't accomplish the goals that I'd wanted to. And
Right.
if I couldn't with my previous strength and edge, how in the world am I ever going to do it now? And sometimes that, I mean, we feel like we're losing something, and we kind of get nervous, and we get, you know, a little psychotic maybe, you know. um but maybe we just need to become more comfortable with the idea that losing that is fine, because the deeper, richer things are what are going to define us anyway.
Yeah,
um
you and I talked. Sorry to interrupt you,
no,
uh,
go.
but we talked a little bit about, you know, kind of the verse that's become one of my life verses these days. It's kind of a weird one, but it's out of Acts chapter 26, and where it says about David, King David, and it says David accomplished God's purposes for his generation, and then he died,
Hmm.
and that's the whole statement. Just boom,
Yeah.
and you go, that's your life verse, but you go, you know, instead of so much of what you're talking about, you know, that we have lived the first 50 years of our lives for either for success or for gain or finances or for honor or to please people, you know, and I think this next season, when you hit that point, you want to go, God, what if I could just accomplish your purposes for
Hmm.
my life, for this generation? You know, what if loving my grandson is the purpose you have for me right now? Um, you know, you know, I just want to accomplish your purposes for my life, for this generation. And when I've done that, then you can take me home.
Yeah.
I've done what you've asked me to do. And I again, I think this season of midlife invites us to not disengage. Don't quit the race. You know, don't don't think you're useless. Don't think, but in a new way, to slow down and say, God, between you and me, I want to go deeper. I want
Hmm.
to be richer. I want to fall more in love with you. And then out of that, I want to do the things that I want to accomplish your purposes for my life for this generation. And whatever and they're going to be really different than when I was in my 20s and 30s. But
Yeah.
you are not done with my character. You're not done with my heart. You're not done with your purposes through my life. And we could still do that. And so, but what I have now is an opportunity to listen more, to be quieter, and I hope in my spirit, I don't want my flaws to become more brittle. I want my heart to become more tender, and I want it to become bigger. Uh, to keep. One of the other things that I think these days is I keep thinking when I say I don't know about God, He gets bigger. And when
Yeah.
I think I have all the answers, I have the theology, the politics, I have all that stuff figured out because I know God and I've read his book. And you go, well, so have I. But you can also hit a point where you say, but the more I say, I don't know. I just want to know his heart. And it will be consistent with his book and all that. But the more I go, but I haven't figured it all out, and I maybe don't have all the answers. I've just found that his character and his heart gets bigger and bigger when I let him. And to
Yeah.
go, I want this season to be about that, and then out of that accomplish his purposes for my life for this generation, for this season, and then take me home. But it's that saying I want to grow more in him. I shared with you a story. There's a great French painter named Gustave Doré, and he painted very huge landscapes, is what he was famous for. But it's supposedly true story, and this story has marked me so much as a worship leader through the years. If you're a worship leader out there, listen right now. Um, but I think it's also true for us as pastors, you being a pastor, but just as people who are loving our families and loving our neighbors. But Dore painted these huge landscapes, and there's supposedly a true story about a student that brings him a picture of Jesus. And he holds it up before the master and says, "Master, what do you think?" And Dore considers for a moment and then looks at his student, and he looks at the painting, and then he looks back at his student and he says, "If you loved him more, you'd paint him better." And man, that story has marked my heart. As a worship leader, my job was to paint people a picture of Jesus and to let them respond in worship or in how they live their lives, and to live with that sense of, when I love him more, I'll paint him better. And I want this season of life, however long God gives me, I want that to be continue to be when I love him more, I paint him better. And whether that is just walking down the street or being gracious to the person that needs to use the machine that I'm on at the Y, or somebody that crosses me at a stoplight, wouldn't you love to go? But when I love them more, I paint him better, and I want to paint him better to every person that I meet. And if to a few key ones, I would love them to be able to look and go, I want to know Jesus the way my dad or my grandpa or my neighbor does. And if I can do that, that'll be enough, you know. Yeah, and I think, and the key to me right now this season is going. It's an opportunity to slow down, to shift from the striving and the success to going deeper to purpose and significance, and letting God speak more deeply through us. So
Yeah. Well, so much of that is based on our perspective of the world. right? What is significance? Well, in our early 20s, our significance might have been all about growing a larger church, making more money, climbing up the corporate ladder of success, blah, blah, blah. And now significance means something totally different. You'd mentioned something the other day. You said that a lot of the absolutes all of a sudden became foggy. Things that you believed that you felt so strong about in your 20s and 30s all of a sudden became unclear. Were there some of those absolutes that you might be able to speak to? And I know you've kind of already have, but were there any like big absolute truths about life or about yourself or about God that all of a sudden just seemed kind of like not so clear, and kind of led that you had to work through and reprocessing?
Uh, yeah, I don't know how many of them you want to get into on your podcast.
Give us a couple of top ones, maybe the big rocks.
Yeah, um, I mean, there are issues like I'll use women in leadership.
Hmm.
Things that we thought we were so clear on for so long. But I think the more that for me, that I would dive into the heart and the character of God and say, what do we know about the heart and the character of God?
Yeah.
And if that is true about the heart and the character of God, then what would be true about God's beliefs about women and their gifts and their significance and their
Mhm.
importance to the kingdom? And I think there are a lot of issues like that these days that have kind of upended my apple cart as again John Ortberg, who I worked with for a long time at Willoughby, used to talk about the preponderance of evidence. What
Hmm.
does Scripture tell us about the heart and the character of God? What is the preponderance of evidence throughout Scripture? And that you have to read specific verses and passages in light of the preponderance of evidence. And the great news, again, for those of us that are in this journey, is that I think the preponderance of evidence continues to point us back to a God who is a servant, to a God who is loving beyond. When you think of the person in your life that exhibits has modeled love for you more than any person you've ever met, and then times that by 100,000
Hmm.
and go, that is the love of God in Christ Jesus. Jesus says, you want to know the heart of God? You want to know what he looks like? Look at me. And that's what we're supposed to look at, how Jesus treated people and loved. And you want to see love? Look at me. And the more that we dive into that, the more we discover grace, and that and things like that. The cross was enough. Jesus didn't say, come to the cross and pray the prayer. And now you better start marching, and don't forget to confess your sins every day, because I won't listen to your prayers anymore if you don't remember them all. And, and you better vote this way, and you better not drink this, and you better not dance. And, that's just not the heart we see of God.
Yeah.
And when we this season is an opportunity again to go deeper, and to go, what is the heart of God? What do we see about the heart of God? What do we and when Jesus says, I came into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world would be saved? How often do we use Jesus to condemn the world? If you don't pray this prayer, if you don't act this way, if you don't confess this sin, if you and we use Jesus as a rod of condemnation instead of a bridge of reconciliation and love. And the more that we understand the heart of God, the love of God, the grace of Christ, then we say, would you let that Lord, be true in me. I want to be that. I want to be an example of that. I want to live that. And, I hit a point a while back where I went, well, someday I'm going to stand before God. And there's probably a whole bunch of theological issues he's going to go, you got that wrong,
Yep.
and you screwed that up. But I came to the conclusion that I would rather stand before him and say, you screwed that up, but it was because you were being loving, because you were being gracious, because God is love, and you showed my character and my heart and my holiness and my care for people, and you became more of that. I'd rather stand before God and be wrong because I strove for that than because I was too judgmental and condemning and other things that we these days can be all too easily. So,
Mm.
so this season for me is going, okay, I think the first season of my life was about do ministry, and I don't regret it. It was phenomenal. I thank God for, you know, all the teams I served and the people I served and the messages I heard and the things that we did were unbelievable. And then I look at this season and go, but I don't resent this season, because this season there is this season of deepening and ripening and growing, and I think as long as I continue to pursue the heart of God, and it's leading me in the direction that it is, um, that I go, man, this is a great journey to be on. I want to love him more. I want to know him more. I want to express that to others more. And I pray and hope that I have a friend. I pray and I hope that people will see more and more of him in me. And I have a friend that you know he saw a retirement counselor and spent a long time diving into going. The counselor kept going, what gets you up every day? What gets you up every day? And he spent a long time weeding and wrestling, and his conclusion was, I get up every day with the hope and the prayer that I would bless one person that day.
Mm.
And this guy was really successful and phenomenally loved in ministry and stuff. But that was where he came to, is going, if I could bless one person today. And these days I pray and hope to be the kind of person that would show Christ and who he really is to somebody each day, you know.
That's 365 people in a year.
that
That's
would be
not too
okay.
bad.
Yeah.
So being from Willow, and you've talked very selflessly about your passion, your desire to love and to serve and to really honor God. Um, and being successful at a place like Willow, there has to be some ego, there has to be some drive. And we talked the other day about this wrestling with our ego, this idea that our ego has certain goals that drive us and things like that. How did your wrestling match with your ego go? Was there a moment in time where you kind of came to this place where you just had to crucify your ego? Was it was it a transitional stage of life, or how did that seem to work? The whole struggle with your ego.
Early on, I think one of the moments that marked me, and it, I just feel like right now, I just want to say to anybody listening, this I sound way too noble on all of this, and I sound like I have it figured out, and I sound like I'm like really good at something, and I really want to say, guys, I'm not. I really truly want to say, this is what I'm striving for. This is what I dream of. It's what I get up and pray for. And And it doesn't mean that I'm good at it. And I sound, just talking about it sounds like I think I'm an expert, and I'm not. I am just a fellow pilgrim going, I'm just trying to follow Christ. What does that look
Yeah.
like? And, early on, our pastor at Willow, gave a message called Downward Mobility. And it was out of Philippians 2, and he talked about how Jesus left the throne, and this passage, and he came to earth, and
Hmm.
he took on the form of a slave, and
Yeah.
and and he served even to the point of death. And I just remember our pastor asking the question, which way did Jesus step? He stepped down, down, down. And I think at a time in my life where I was very tempted to live with, to be quite proud of my accomplishments, or to brag about, I'm being part of Willow when Willow was really famous, or to name drop, oh yeah, I'm the worship leader at Willow Creek, and I'm ashamed of that stuff now, and it makes me sad that I thought I needed that, or that, and but I remember at some point starting to go, which way did Jesus step?
Mm.
And when I left Willow to help a friend start a church in Traverse City, Michigan, with 100 people in a gymnasium, and leave 20 some thousand people to go start. But I remember thinking, what part of this would be bad for me? What part of this would it be? And right in the middle of that, I think I told you the story about being in Copenhagen, in the airport in Copenhagen, and a whole group of people came around the corner and saw me and went, "Oh, Willow Creek, Willow Creek." And I walked away going, "Oh, that was really unhealthy. I liked that way too much." And and then again going, what part of this would be bad for me to step down into humility, to step down in, and there's a problem in the local church these days, when everything about the Western church is about going up and to the right. Grow your church,
Yes.
grow your recognition, have a better band than the church down the street, do the cooler songs, when everything is about up and to the right, and then you look at the one we're supposed to follow, and he's stepping down and to the left. What
Mm.
happens when they get further and further apart, when we as people get further and further apart, and you go, no, if he's stepping down into the left,
Mm.
I want to go that way. I want to know that guy. And I've been a part of multiple ministries that all did up and to the right. And I have found myself at this age going, wow, I wonder how often I was on the wrong bus, because it's not really who Jesus was about. And and again, the people's lives that were touched, I treasure, and I thank God for all the memories and the moments. But sometimes I wonder, but I'm also aware of the underlying motives and things that could be behind all that all along the way, and going, man, I I sure want to continue to grow in the other direction.
Yeah. Wow. That was powerful. Um, that realization, because I think a lot of times we know the right things to say,
Mm.
but actually stepping into that way of our Savior, and asking that question, but which way is He going?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, He walked to Calvary. He set His gaze and walked toward Calvary. You couldn't get much more down and to the left,
No.
than walking toward your own crucifixion intentionally.
Yeah.
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 Now, are there any other kind of axiomatic thoughts, axioms that you live by now that may be totally different? At one point it was up and to the right, and now it's down and to the left. Are there any more of those kinds of things that you would say have sort of marked your life now as compared to your pre-midlife stage?
We talked about that axiom word earlier, and I think, I think of we've woven most of those into our conversation. The opportunity to grow deeper, um,
Yeah.
Gustav Doré, the longing to if you love them more, you paint them better. Um,
Hmm.
the idea of what if well done was about relationship, not about successes. The Philippians 2 thing. I think those are but those make such a difference when I get up these days and I walk into this office and I sit down with my Bible and a journal and go and 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 go, what gets me out of bed in the morning these days, when it's not traveling the world and doing all those things, or when it's choosing to empower a young leader and let them run and let them go. But those are the things that make life meaningful and to me, and loving my wife and loving my kids and trying to love my friends well, um, and wanting to live that journey. And you know, to me, that's always the journey. I've always wanted to know and see God more, and I feel like he hasn't stopped letting me do that. You know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this has been a rich conversation. And thank you for opening your heart to us. Is there anything that maybe you'd hope that we would get to today? I just haven't asked the right question or whatever. Is there anything else you'd want to share with a group of people who are just trying to figure out how to navigate midlife?
No, I think you've already squeezed all there is out of the sponge. The you know the uh, the wisdom, whatever I've had. I hope something of it is helpful and meaningful to
Yeah.
people, and uh, yeah, and I just think this journey will never get old, because
Yeah.
God just keeps getting bigger. His love keeps getting deeper. His grace there's always more to discover. And I think when we get on this journey, even in all of our failures and all of the mistakes we make along the way, this is a journey worth walking.
And can you imagine what it's going to be like when we step over into eternity?
Yeah.
I mean, we're living in eternity right now, but stepping into what God has for us, as we see life getting richer and richer as we go. I can't, no eye has seen or no one has imagined what
Yeah.
God has in store for those who love Him.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. Well, tell us real quick, what are you up to these days? What are you anticipating? What are you heading for? And where can people find you if they're interested in knowing a little bit more about you and your ministry and that kind of
Thank
stuff?
you. I spent most of my adult life in the area of worship. And the passage in Ezekiel that comes to mind, that often motivated me, was where God just says, "I have concern for the honor of my name,"
Mm,
and not that God needs compliments from us, but that we would just see Him fully for who He is. And C.S. Lewis says worship is responding to something we love, but that when we see Him and we love Him, we can't help but express it. And the passion in my life these days is to help churches bring God a richer offering, to not just use songs to get people in from the parking lot and to hand out the offering and sing a few Christian ditties, but that we would actually create times where people encounter God and
yeah.
meet with Him, because it's what He longs for, and I think it's what we're desperate for. And so check out engagingtheheart.com or Engaging the Heart with Joe Horness. And this fall, we'll launch a whole new mentoring and coaching ministry to churches all over the country that just are saying, yeah, I don't want to just do song times. I want to bring God a deep, genuine, rich offering uh, each week. And because that's what brings people to church, not just because we're cooler than the church down the street. And so if you have a heart for that and go, come help us, check that out.
That's awesome. And I'll make sure that information is in the show notes. But Man, thank you so much for just sharing your heart because it's given us inspiration, hope, vision that we can literally have an encounter with the living God and not just go through the motions or be performing in a religious sense.
That's what
And
he
that's our hope
wants. Yep.
for people. Absolutely. Well, Joe, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your heart today, for being on the show. And I just pray blessings over you and the ministry that you're heading into.
Thank
And thanks again so much
you.
for
Right.
being with us today.
We'll be in touch, I hope. All
Sounds
right.
great, man. God
Thank
bless.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Joe for sharing his heart and vulnerability and transparency and helping us to just get a glimpse into his life and how God is continuing to shape him into his third quarter of life. I did ask Joe if he'd be willing to give us his Facebook link so that we could reach out to him. So if you'd like to connect with Joe, maybe have some questions for him or are interested in his worship collective, I'd encourage you to reach out to him through his Facebook. That information will be in the show notes associated with this YouTube video or the on the Apple or Spotify podcast. So thank you again so much for joining me today. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. It helps this channel to grow and to reach more people. Helps me to be able to do better episodes and continue to grow this channel and this show so that we can bring you uh, different guests and different topics and all kinds of things. The next one I have lined up, I'm really excited about. It's going to be about marriage and family, and that's going to be a conversation with Randy Gravitt. And so I really hope that you will be looking forward to that as well. In the meantime, God bless you. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless. Bye-bye.